They entered the restaurant with the ease of someone returning to a familiar space, and the CEO of their charitable endeavors, expressing his enthusiasm for the seasonal meal we'd just developed, greeted me warmly with a handshake at the door. It had to be difficult for Melanie and her companions to make sense of it all. It wasn't just the notable guests. It was also the staff's impeccably coordinated movements, the refined elegance of the space, the subtle interior design, and the overall excellence that radiated from every corner, making the place feel far more than just a tavern. They were beginning to understand that the tipping point had arrived when two food critics walked in. I recognized them immediately. They had both written glowing reviews of us in the past. They were shown to their table with the utmost care, the kind of consideration we reserved for our most cherished guests. One of them caught my eye, raised his glass in acknowledgement, and I nodded back, savoring the excitement of the moment. By this time, Melanie and her group had stopped pretending to be casual. They were now openly watching, their faces a mix of disbelief and wonder. It was almost comical. These were women who prided themselves on knowing and accessing the finest things, yet they had missed the gem right in front of them. The final straw came when one of Melanie's more outgoing friends decided to investigate. I saw her approaching, the click of her high-end shoes echoing on the pavement as she walked up to the maitre d'. Her expression was a blend of entitlement and curiosity, accompanied by a practiced grin, the kind that typically opened doors in their world. "This restaurant is new," she said, her voice tinged with polite curiosity. "I've never heard of it before." The maitre d' didn't flinch at her tone. "Ma'am," he replied, "Jem has been serving guests for over 10 years. Our reservations are made with precision and are based on recommendations. We only repeat them when necessary. Our wait list is 3 months long, and we give preference to clients referred by our current patrons." She stood there for a moment, momentarily stunned, before she gave a strained smile and backed away. I could almost feel the collective panic of Melanie and her friends as they rejoined her, their understanding of the situation slowly sinking in. As I looked toward the kitchen, a small secret smile crept onto my face. This was better than any conflict. They had come to belittle my work, but now they had been handed a reminder of their own narrow perspective. As the evening wore on, Melanie and her companions, once brimming with arrogance, fell into an uncomfortable silence. Their laughter had quieted, their conversation slowed, and the tension in the air was palpable. I didn't need to prove anything to my staff or anyone else. By the time they left, their faces were drained, and their companions, who had once seemed so impressive, could do little but shrink in their own discomfort. Their rejection of me had come full circle. They now had to grapple with their own shallowness. The best part? They still didn't know the full truth, that the chef they'd belittled, the husband they'd dismissed, was at the heart of it all. For now, I knew the secret would soon be revealed, and when it was, it would hit them like a freight train. I was content to let them squirm in their confusion. They had unwittingly prepared the ground for this moment, and it was a reminder they had earned. Later that night, after the last patrons had left and the crowd had dissipated, I leaned against the kitchen counter, reflecting on the evening. The service had been flawless, a testament to our dedication. It was the kind of night that reaffirmed my purpose in life, but there was still one lingering thought. Despite the earlier departure of Melanie and her group, I knew they still had the rest of the night to puzzle over what they had witnessed. From across the street, they'd seen just enough to spark their curiosity, but not enough to satisfy it. At the baby shower, the mood had shifted, with whispered speculations fueled by fragments of what they'd seen. They were starting to realize that Jem wasn't a run-of-the-mill pub, but something far more special. Their ignorance would drive them to dig deeper. Melanie and her close friend Amanda would likely have Googled us in a desperate attempt for answers. However, they'd find very little. Our website was simple, consisting of just one page, with only a brief mention of our name and a short explanation of our guiding principles. The reservation procedure had been deliberately understated, offering just enough intrigue to draw in the right kind of visitors without overexposing the experience. Of course, the inevitable reviews started to surface. Soon, the reputation of my restaurant spread across food blogs and gourmet magazines, with headlines calling it a hidden gem and one of Boston's most upscale dining establishments. I could already picture Melanie's reaction. She'd be scrolling through article after article, her fingers trembling, the truth finally sinking in. Her face would go pale as she realized just how much she'd underestimated my 10 years of hard work. The very dates that she had dismissed would now haunt her, matching up with everything she had ignored simply because it didn't fit her narrative. Her friends, too, would be in disbelief, especially those who prided themselves on knowing the best spots in town. They would feel betrayed, realizing they had mocked what had now become one of the city's most sought-after experiences. And the best part, they couldn't fix it. Even if their wealth or connections allowed them to bypass the reservation system, they would still need a referral from someone who had been vetted. And even then, they'd have to wait months. As I thought about all this, I didn't feel angry. Instead, there was a quiet sense of validation. I had built this from the ground up, dish by dish, without compromising for anyone's approval. And tonight, it was speaking loudly enough to be heard. I walked into the now empty dining room, the soft glow from the chandeliers illuminating the tables. I paused at the window, gazing across the street where the lights had been switched off for the baby shower. The guests had left in silence, but I could tell their conversations would be far from over. In the coming days, I knew they'd try to piece together how a place they had once mocked had become one of Boston's finest dining experiences. But they wouldn't uncover the whole story. My journey, my accomplishments, stretched far beyond their shallow assessments. They had only seen a glimpse. The morning after the baby shower, I realized the fallout had already begun. Melanie and her circle weren't the type to let a mysterious restaurant slip under the radar for long. They would search every source, trying to unravel how a place they had ridiculed had transformed into an exclusive establishment. But they wouldn't find everything. They wouldn't discover the depth behind my story, which couldn't be understood with a quick Google search. Later that day, as I worked at Hidden Gem, a server came up to me with a knowing look. "Chef, there's a woman at the door asking about reservations. She claims to know you, but she doesn't have an appointment." I didn't need to ask who it was. I already knew. "Send the maitre d' to take care of it," I said, not even looking up from the sauce I was adjusting. A few minutes later, the maitre d' returned. "Chef, it's Amanda, your wife's friend. She's trying to use her relationship with Mrs. Wilson to get a table." A faint smile tugged at my lips. "Is she now?" I asked. "What did you tell her?" The maitre d' replied, "She knows the policy, but she chose not to comply." I nodded, content. Amanda's sense of entitlement was becoming clear. But that wasn't enough to get past the doors of Hidden Gem. Later that evening, a waiter approached me again. "Mrs. Wilson is here." I wasn't surprised, but I was curious. What had brought Melanie here so quickly? Was it guilt, desperation, or something else? I took off my apron, cleaned my hands, and walked into the main dining area. There she was, standing near the door in an expensive coat that felt out of place against the understated elegance of the restaurant. Her face was pale, her posture rigid. She seemed to have just realized the magnitude of her mistakes. I approached her. "What are you doing here?" She paused, glancing around the room as if searching for the right words. "I wanted to talk to you," she said, then hesitated. "And maybe make a reservation." I raised an eyebrow. "You know the policy, don't you?" Her voice faltered. For the first time in years, I saw a hint of vulnerability. "Surely there's something you can do?" I shook my head. "No, not for you." Her lips parted, but she remained silent as I continued, my tone calm. "If you want to understand what I've built, you need to start at the bottom, just like everyone else." She looked at me, confused. "You want me to work here?" she asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. I nodded. "No shortcuts. If you're sincere, you'll figure it out. But without that, there's nothing for you here." With that, I turned and left her standing there. I had set a boundary she couldn't cross with empty words or half-hearted apologies. If she truly wanted to understand, she would have to show it. But I wasn't waiting for her. I returned to the kitchen, where everything was running smoothly. The evening continued without a hitch, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I had created something real, something that spoke for itself. Melanie and her friends, with all their wealth and influence, had learned something that night. It wasn't about dismissing others or hiding behind superficial measures. Sometimes success came from building something meaningful for the right reasons.